then there's a circle outside of support industries that have to be there to create the ecosystem that supports a healthy port. Right.
And what comes to mind? Distribution channels, right? That trucking company.
Right. Well, the trucking company, but also what else is involved here in Da Nang? Tourism. Right. So. And even though it's separate from the container industry, it's still part of that port operation. So if you're in logistics and supply chain, you might decide that I'm interested in the way the port operates, but from the tourism point of view, and when it's done properly, is a huge money generator. For the industry.
Okay, welcome. So today we're going to talk about seaports. Welcome to the, I guess this would be the first edition of DTU Talk, so we're excited. My name is Peter Nyheim. I've been at DTU for 12 years doing different things. My background is mostly in hospitality technology and now education technology. So I'm not an expert on ports. I'm just sort of the host, nor is my guest. We're just two guys who read a lot, who have been at DTU, both professors, and are very interested in the topic and very interested in the development of Vietnam. So with that being said, with sort of that caveat, I'll introduce my guest, Dr. David Saea. And please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I've been here now for about 8 years. I'm currently the dean at Southstar Management Institute. And as you say, I'm not an expert on ports, but I'm fascinated. The health of the port is pretty much the health of the area and the nation. And I think as we explore this topic, we'll see pretty clearly how that's reflected through history and through, what happens when ports develop as they should.
Perfect. Just for a little perspective, I've done a lot of research on this every day. Why? Because from my shower, I can see the port of Da Nang. So I'm always thinking about it. Now, the Han River is too shallow. It does not get the shipping, but the port itself is very near here. So that's sort of, again, it's a view from my apartment, and it's something that's sort of intriguing. And David and I were talking one day. I wanted to do a podcast, and we were talking, about the light rail and the subway system that they were doing in Hanoi versus Saigon or Ho Chi Minh, and how they were different. One was a Chinese company, one was a Japanese company, and we were talking about that, and then we started talking about trade and ports. We always have good conversations, and then it was a spark that said, wow, that could be our first podcast about ports. So that's sort of the genesis of what brought us here today. Starting big, right? I'll be a teacher. So starting big, ports sort of, it follows history, right? So think of history as far as ports go anyway. Think of the Mediterranean. There was a different dynamic going on in Asia at the time. But when it comes to ports, the big ports, sort of the history of them were around the Mediterranean. Think the Middle East, Southern Europe. So I've sent you this list. I mean, Alexandria, Carthage, Constantinople, right? Carthage is now defunct. Think the Phoenicians, but this is 800 years before BC.
We're talking 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Carthage was so important vis-a-vis the Romans that when the Romans sacked Carthage, they basically made sure it wouldn't rise as a port again by basically destroying the soil all around it.
Is that right? Oh, yeah, wow. Okay.
They actually...
That's cool. Not cool, but that's interesting. Yeah.
They went through the fields and put salt.
They salted the earth.
So that it couldn't support a big population, and the port died because of that.
Okay.
And again, if you know history at all, Hannibal not Hannibal Lecter, but
Right.
Hannibal the general.
The guy on the top of the elephant.
Yeah. That's where the elephants came from. They came from Carthage. He took them across the Himalayas and nearly overthrew Rome. He came really close. So that was the first time. So when they got a chance, they struck back and struck hard.
Right.
And the port
Right.
was the first thing they destroyed.
Interesting. So, Dana, we also have interesting conversations, and this is part of the reason why we wanted to do this podcast for DTU. I know there's a lot of student stuff, but we also wanted to talk about maybe some more, maybe non-DTU stuff that's still part of Da Nang, still part of Vietnam, that would still be germane or particular to, or of interest to maybe a different audience or that same audience on just a different topic.
So when we think about Da Nang as a port city, it doesn't matter what example you're using, whether it's Carthage, whether it's Alexandria, whether it's Venice. That is part of what happens at a port. A port is a lifeblood for the country, and it's of strategic importance no matter what culture it's in, and that's still true today. And we'll look in a minute. Singapore just exceeded, I think it's 3 billion metric tons a year of container. It's mind-boggling. And when we get into the billions, it's really hard to even visualize how big that is. Mixed tonnage, so containers and other types of things that are in containers like oil and gravel and building materials. I think it's somewhere around 300 million metric tons. So we're talking about an order of magnitude
10x,
difference between the port here and one of the major ports in the world, Singapore, and I don't think it's even the largest port anymore. It used to be.
So we'll keep going. So this is fun. So this, so think about after, basically the Mediterranean Sea and ancient history. We can skip ahead, and we could have a whole program on just Venice.
Oh yeah.
400 years of just being the place to be in the world for trade. It was Venice.
Right, and again, so I think an important thing, it's not just trade. So when we talk about a place like Alexandria or a place like Venice, they also become cultural centers because there's so much exchange going on. People want to be there. There's opportunity. There's money. And one of the things that happens in a thriving economy is, and ports generally create a thriving environment, you also get development of the arts and literature, those types of things. And we see that, again, everywhere there's a major important port. Yes, there's industrialization that happens around it, but then there's wealth generation, and from that wealth generation, you get people starting to sponsor the arts. And why is that important? Because art tends to drive culture. If there's going to be a cultural change within a society, it happens from the arts.
That's a really good point.
And it happens here.
It ain't just business.
There is a reason why we do business. Obviously, we want to generate enough surplus to support higher education, right? And higher education tends to span all of those things, from the arts to science. And you need disposable income in order to do that.
Interesting. China, ports. This is...
The top 7.
Yeah.
The top 7 ports of the 15 busiest ports are all in China. From Shanghai to Guangzhou, Hong Kong. Those are some of the busiest ports on the planet.
So Port of Shanghai did 47 million TEUs. Those are 20-foot equivalent units. Those are those big containers you see on the back of trucks, right? Those big containers. So they did 47 million of them. So that was Shanghai. After that was Singapore. Singapore came in at number 2 at 37 million. And then back to China Number 6 was South Korea. Number 7, China. Number 8, China. Number 9, China. And number 10, Dubai.
And Rotterdam should be up there pretty high.
Yeah, 12. Rotterdam's 12.
And then Belgium.
And
right below.
And just for context for any Americans out there, Los Angeles is number 16 at about 10 million, 10 or 11 million. And then New York, New Jersey, you think that's a big one? 7.5 million. So things coming, I would guess, things coming from, Vietnam go to California.
Well,
and then if they reach New York, it's by rail.
And the other thing that happens in the U.S. because of the long coastlines is that they tend to be distributed.
Right.
And even though that might be inefficient in terms of replication of equipment, it's a much more resilient model. Mm-hmm. You have multiple ports instead of concentrated.
Would it be Los Angeles and Long Beach?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Actually.
I mean, the two big ones, I'm guessing.
There's Long Beach, there's
LA,
and I think Seattle also.
Yeah. Okay.
In the north, but it's distributed, and that's one of the things that I noticed. Even on the East Coast, you've got.
I'm thinking Virginia.
Jersey,
Yeah.
You've got Virginia. You've got Savannah.
New Orleans.
Yeah. Right. New Orleans is also another one.
Yeah.
So there's a great span. You've got a huge amount of coastline in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to concentrate.
We'll have to double check. I'm guessing it's Los Angeles, but I know just there's one sea lane from Vietnam to America right now. I think it's LA. I think it's LA. So that's just right now. So there's a whole, when it comes to ports, there's a whole lot.
And remember, there's also the Panama Canal. So it doesn't necessarily have to.
Isn't it dry right now though? Is it?
I think so.
Is it back? Okay.
I'm not sure if it's back yet.
Okay.
And that's the other thing that keeps happening, right? So these container ships keep getting bigger and bigger. They're absolutely gigantic at this point. But science keeps pushing it forward, and you get bigger ships.
Right. You don't really see many of the big ones here. They look to be smaller.
And that's one of the things that I think is on the horizon.
Right.
For the ports here. You need special, equipment to deal with ships of that size.
Deeper water.
And none of that is necessarily a technological obstacle any longer.
Right.
In the past,
dredging's been done for.
Right. In the past it was, but now you can do it.
Right.
And it's affordable. It makes sense, and I think we'll see that.
Definitely.
Yeah, and these are just questions I asked ChatGPT. I said, ask ChatGPT, what are the 10 reasons that contribute to making a good seaport? Right? Let's ask. Number 1, strategic location. Makes sense, right? Proximity to major shipping routes. And then it said access to hinterlands.
Yeah, I read that.
Hinterlands. Yeah. Hinterlands are the sort of undeveloped, like the woods, but I thought that was...
Yeah, and
ChatGPT still has limitations, so remember that.
Yeah, and I think that's a misinterpretation of ChatGPT looking at it.
Right.
Hinterlands is the word again.
It means landlocked areas, as opposed to wooded areas.
Right.
And that actually, I think, when you think about that specific point, and I think we need to understand that better, it's what does that encourage? So if you've got a major port, you start getting the development that happens around the major port.
Right.
And then you start getting spurs going out. You get, there's a very strong incentive to develop, better rail transit.
Mm-hmm.
So the rail transit that's happened all over China isn't by mistake. They're moving goods as well as people.
Definitely.
And so those are the things that need to happen here. And I think it's some of the things we'll see. Corridors opening up in terms of rail. And when you have port facilities, the big drawback of rail is that it's fixed. it's from A to B, and the straighter the line, the better. That's fine with ports, right? And then especially if you're moving heavy goods. So that's still a very viable type of thing, and they're making huge advances in terms of how fast we can move those trains.
Right.
And I think that all bodes well for what happens in Vietnam and specifically here in Vietnam.
Absolutely.
So just continuing on. So number 2, remember this is I just asked ChatGPT top 10 things to make for a good seaport. I'll just finish the list. Natural harbor conditions, right? Is it deep enough? Infrastructure and facilities, as David was talking about. Connectivity and accessibility goes along with that. Efficient port operations, good management, good employees, good training. Economic stability and incentives, money, money, money. Regulatory environment, safety and security, environmental considerations, and that there's a whole lot there. If you're going to make that water deeper and you're going to bring in a lot of gasoline, diesel in those ships, there's obviously a conversation, and then economic impact and community support. So that sort of rounds out the top 10. And we talked about the biggest ports in the world. Just continuing on, if we just steering the conversation to Southeast Asia, just in our neck of the woods where we are, Singapore was number 1.
And I think Malaysia.
So here it is. Singapore's number 1. Malaysia, and I have we've both been to Malaysia. I was there recently. The Malacca Straits. That's the famous one where you just see all those ships going through. I mean, that's sort of to give you an idea of how big it is. So we talked about the size of Singapore. And again, this is just Southeast Asia, then Malaysia, then Indonesia, Thailand, and then Malaysia again, Philippines, and Ho Chi Minh or Saigon comes in at number 7. So now we're sort of drilling down into seeing where the tonnage is there. And then up north, right? Number 8, Haiphong. And then we go, and then after that is Myanmar, formerly Burma, and we'll talk about how significant that is. But that comes in at number 9 of the big ports in Southeast Asia, and then Cambodia.
Right. So once you're to Myanmar, then you have a decision whether you're going to go east or west. You go through the Indian Ocean and out through like the Red Sea, so you have that decision to make because remember. A lot of the voyages of discovery were all looking for faster ways to get to the other side of the planet by boat. Whether it was the Northwest Passage or around the Cape of Good Hope or,
Drake's Passage.
Right? So then, technology figured out that, we can dig through places, Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, right? And that connected the oceans.
Right. Getting around that bottom of South America is a dangerous trip.
And they lost. That was the other thing, right?
You lose a lot of stuff.
Huge amounts of cargo gets lost,
right,
in ocean,
right,
storms.
Right.
So if you can, keep things around the center of, calmer waters, right, and shorter trips.
Okay. So now we're drilling down to Vietnam. So this is sort of the other thing when it comes to just denying it. So remember, we have the biggest port is in the south, Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, and then they're two, and they're two, and they separate them. But it's think of they're pretty close. So I have one in the south, one in the north, and then here we are in the middle. And it's, I saw just by chance, Channel News Asia one day had a thing on Da Nang. This is, I don't know if I told you, and basically all about the infrastructure. And it's just, when it comes to the port here and when it comes to the infrastructure in this region and other regions, Japanese. You have some Indian companies now who have history with ports and rail that are coming in, but it's, but I know one of the biggest foreign direct investors for the port here are the Japanese. So there's a lot going on there.
And it really makes sense. I mean, I think you were mentioning, growth of this port has been like, 15% a year.
Yeah, no, it's
For
So this is a good segue, and I actually don't have to skip ahead. In 2013, of those containers, they did 167,000. And of 2023, they did 673,000. So 10 years ago, 167,000. Now, 673,000. So in 10 years, they say it's growing by 15% a year. So you can just see where that's going for Da Nang.
right, and the plans right now are for, a whole, basically section 2 of the port on the other side of the strait coming in, and it's a protected port. So in terms of your list, Da Nang fulfills a lot of those better than
Checks a lot of boxes, doesn't it?
than a lot of places, and I don't think that list is necessarily you have to have one before you have the other. I think certain of those, like geographic location and a natural port setting, I think those are just sort of geographic necessities that we've got.
right.
But then there's other things in terms of
No, the location's perfect.
infrastructure development and things like that can follow along. You can backfill that, and as the port grows, it can probably drive a lot of that. So the investment that's coming in, I think that can happen, or that will actually. I think that will happen. It's almost a chicken and egg type of thing. But the fact that the port is here and growing like that should drive those other things in terms of connectivity, in terms of infrastructure, and then attracting the investment necessary to do that. It's a good investment.
Right.
And it's not just those containers we're talking about. Just the 2018, these numbers are from passenger ships, right? They're making a big thing. You remember, my background is in technology for tourism and hospitality. So when it comes to in 2018, they had 200,000 passengers who came through. COVID, so we don't have the recent numbers. It's probably still right around there. You'll see a big passenger ship coming in every now and again, and 5,000 people will get off and come to Da Nang for a couple days. So I know that's a big driver from the tourist people in Da Nang as well. So again, so it's not just ships. So the port's also for people.
Well, and environmentally, you mentioned, how a lot of those ships, will come in and there's diesel and there's waste and there's all sorts of things that come along with those. But I think that is improving also. Better materials, better engineering, different ways to drive, those big ships. And I think we're going to see a lot of improvement over the next, decade or so, about, the way we power those ships. So I think that's changing also.
No, good point.
So sort of just numbers to remember. So in 10 years, again, it's gone from about 160,000 to 670,000. So 15% growth a year, just in those 10 years. More passenger ships coming through. Huge Japanese investment in the port itself. Lots of sort of ancillary infrastructure being thought of or developed right now.
Is a huge thing in terms of just, I don't know if you've ever sat there and watched a port work.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Big cranes moving back and forth.
Yeah.
And, the program.
It's like science fiction almost, like a robot,
Basically it is.
Yeah.
It's a big robot, and it's computer controlled. And one of the things that's exciting for SMI, for our school, is that, one of our major areas is logistics and port management. So, seeing my students engaged and pursuing, a career in that area, I find that very fulfilling because I believe that's an area that is just bound to grow.
And it's one of those big things that's right in front of us, but somehow we can miss. So that's sort of another reason why we want to talk about this. Is there are a lot of career options there are a lot of career options. Period.
Right. Yeah. That are driven by the port.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention a couple things that port development. Obviously is important. We've been talking about the economics behind it. I think also strategically it's important for Da Nang to attract investors, but also for Vietnam in general. Once you start developing, ports and you start getting the kind of traffic that a place like Singapore or Rotterdam or Shanghai has, even approaching those numbers, you start building in a kind of stability in terms of politics, in terms of geopolitics.
Right.
Because once you have established trade routes,
right,
there's a very strong tradition of international law that you don't mess with those trade routes.
right,
Because too many interests are involved from many, many different countries. And
vested interests.
exactly. And so it doesn't make sense.
Right,
So if you grow those, you grow the stability
right,
of the country.
right.
And I think that's a great reason to grow your ports. You not only do you generate huge amounts of economic development, job performance, job creation, but you also develop a greater international stability and international profile that is very difficult to push around. And you don't even have to say anything about it because it's just there. You've got ships coming in and out,
Right.
and it has established a presence that basically politically cannot be ignored. And if it's interfered with, is a really like the third rail of the
Right.
of the subway system.
Right.
Which brings me to one other thing I wanted to mention.
Sure.
In Da Nang, we don't have a raised rail system yet.
Mm-hmm.
But as part of the development of the port, it's something that we should really think about. Because not only is it mass transit for people, so you get people off their motorbikes and give them other options of dependable transportation. You also, move people from the airport to the hotels, and they get to see how beautiful the city is in a raised rail type of thing. But the secret other benefit is that when you're not moving people, you build it so you move containers. So you move containers from outside the city through the city to the port efficiently and get rid of the tractor trailers through the middle of town. Improve the air quality, improve the safety on the roads, improve the efficiency of the port. The system pays for itself because you're moving so much more freight.
Right.
And that kind of infrastructure is the kind of thing that separates a place like Da Nang from the rest of the world, or could.
That's good, because that brings us to the final part of what the port is also there for. We mentioned the port in Myanmar, right? And then we have the port of Da Nang, right? And what that's supposed to do is supposed to establish an east-west corridor. Again, those are the port sides and the port endpoints. And then going across them, it takes 28 days now, they say, by truck but what they're trying to do also with the port of Da Nang is connect it to Burma and all those, Myanmar, and all those countries, the 4 countries it goes across. So that'd be Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. So it also to sort of impact trade with those countries as well. So the port's sort of serving all these different purposes, and it's thriving. And again, a hope that David and I have is that we're both sort of green environmentalist people as well, that because it's new and because they're growing, they have a great opportunity to do it in an environmentally sound way.
Right. I mean, so, those corridors, the ports are fixed. It's not like they're going to shift.
Right.
You can build rail, and rail
Right.
is so much more efficient in moving those things. So instead of 28 days, you get an efficient rail system, and you can probably cut that in half or less.
Right.
Rail systems moving at 200 or 300 kilometers per hour. That's going to move pretty quickly.
Right.
And move those containers where they need to be. And I think that's
Sounds very European.
it's very European, but it
works.
It works,
Yeah.
and they've been doing it in China.
Right.
So our neighbors are doing it. There's
Right.
no reason why we can't. And the Japanese,
point.
who are already
Good point.
doing that in Japan, they have all the reason to invest here.
Right.
Because there's a big return
Right.
on doing that. When you can move that kind of freight for, a couple, 10,000,
Make it cheaper.
10,000 dong, as opposed to, millions. There's a big return there.
No, I remember, we could talk about this forever, but that tightly packed train of apples going from LA to New York, the cost per unit and the damage, it's just compared to trucks is just night and day.
Right. So,
yeah.
fruit is a great example because there's a lot of it that happens.
And it's perishable,
here, right? Yeah, put it on a truck and bounce it around for a while.
Right.
And what do you get by the time you get to market?
Right.
You get damaged fruit and low quality goods. You put it on a rail and have a smooth transit that moves quickly.
That could be our next podcast, rail.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has a big impact.
Right.
And so, like I said, it's not chicken or egg. The development of the port and the usage of the port, the growth of the port can drive the demand for the rail.
And continuing on with our conversation, so it's not just those, those TEUs, those 20-foot equivalent units, not just those containers that we're talking about here. We've talked about a lot of stuff, but in continuing on with that conversation, so Venice is just such a great example of a port and everything it does. So when it comes to students, when it comes to careers, when it's what your thinking is, what you want to do in the future, centralizing what the port is, and then everything that sort of comes around it, and everything that gets built because of that and what's come around it, and sort of the critical mass that it creates, and the different things it starts. So again, so Venice, think of the 13th, the 17th century, and we talked about this. A lot of it was spice. That's sort of. Think pepper and what that did for just that port and that city.
Yeah, pepper. There was a whole trade that went basically across the Arabian Peninsula. I think it was the Nabateans were Bedouins, and they facilitated the trade between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, and then it all went up to Venice and then was distributed through Europe. Incredible amounts of wealth created from that. And so when we look at a port, we might want to think about concentric circles. So, we can start out thinking about just our SMI students, and, they're studying logistics. So they're studying, how things come in and out of the port, how to do that most efficiently. We mentioned that when you watch a port operate, that it's becoming more and more mechanized, but you have to have the knowledge of how do those things work. So, our students learn how to do the logistics inside the operation of a port. So how do those operation systems work? How do you program them? How do you get data in and out of them, which translates into where is, each one of those 700,000 containers at any one time, right? Where does it get set down? Where is it stored? How long is it there? When do we get to move it, right? Is it going in? Is it coming out, right? So all of those things, I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's really not.
Is logistics, is that the number one major, would you say, at DTU? I know it's huge, but how about in SMI?
It's one of the number one because there's a demand.
And then just at DTU itself, logistics and supply chain, I know it's huge, and for obvious reasons. If it's an industry that's if the port's growing at 15% a year, you're probably getting in the right business.
You took the words out of my mouth. So as many quality students as we can produce, the port is snapping them up. And so it's not like, I mean, you have to come and learn it, right? And it's not necessarily easy, but once you do, there's a career, right? And it's a growing career. And, it's a changing career though. So it's not like, you learn it and you're done. No, you learn it and you get in and then you
keep
continue learning.
Don't stop learning.
Right? You don't stop because it's just changing so quickly from the technology to, the software and the way that software is driven and where it's located. All of that keeps changing. So the students have to keep up with that. And it's not just the logistics, it's also materials handling, right? Learning how to do that. How do you pack stuff so that, when it makes those journeys, you're maintaining quality. You're bringing stuff into a humid environment. How do you protect things like finishes and things like that? I mean, all of that stuff needs to be considered when you're moving, what if I'm moving wine? Right? And I'm moving wine from where it's produced, let's say in Chile. And then, it's heat sensitive. It can be moisture sensitive. What kind of...
And think about that for Vietnam. I mean, a lot of shrimp, a lot of coffee,
right?
A lot of fruit. So these are things that...
Well, in all of those things, right? So, you get coffee and it's perfect, but it sits there too long and it's humid and you haven't controlled the environment, and all of a sudden by the time you get it shipped out, it's moldy. It's no good any longer, right? Same thing with fruit. So how long can, a shipment, you've got a new shipment of durian come in, right? How long can it sit there before it has to be moved out and distributed?
Right.
All of those things have to be basically programmed and understood. And that's those are some of the things that our students learn to understand,
So supply chain, quality control, workflow for information technology.
Yes.
Wow, we could go on and on.
It does go on and on, but that's just the first circle, right?
point.
Then there's a circle outside of support industries that have to be there to create the ecosystem that supports a healthy port. Right? And
What comes to mind? Distribution channels, right? That trucking company.
right. Well, the trucking company, but also what else is involved here in Da Nang? Tourism. Right? So and even though it's separate from the container industry, it's still part of that port operation. So if you're in logistics and supply chain, you might decide that, oh, you know what, I'm interested in the way the port operates, but from the tourism point of view. And when it's done properly, is a huge money generator for the industry. You get thousands of people
all at once. Like you get 5,000 people, which is also another conversation. A lot of places get overwhelmed because they don't know maybe the arrival schedules or where they're going.
Well, and that's part of better training. Right? When the training is better, then your industries don't get surprised.
Right.
That's part of good logistics, right? We know they're coming in for these days.
Right.
And barring, a major storm, they'll be here.
Right.
And so
The big ones know. So Novotel, which is right here, Novotel will know when they're going to dock, and usually, they're in touch with the operators of where these people are going to go, where they're going to stay, where they're going to do. However, 5,000 people land all at once. They're not under any obligation to follow your orders, and they may go off to different places. So that's sort of bleeds into my area of tourism technology and predicting future demand and your food costs, and your labor costs, and the rest of your costs, where that becomes important for just a hospitality management student, for example.
Right, and the flip side of that is that when you do have that sort of target-rich environment, 5,000 tourists coming off the boat, when you do get them at places in volume and they're coming, you can serve them better. That is part of it. And there's two sides of that coin. It can be a disaster if you're not ready for them. Right? But if you're ready for them, you actually can bring your costs down, elevate their experience, because you've been able to plan for it.
Right.
And that's what logistics is all about. That's part of what we're hoping to be teaching our students. It's just a really important element of having a high quality environment for tourists and for business, right? So that information technology, the information sharing is really important, and we fail often, too often, in sharing that information here in Da Nang.
No, that's a real good point. You said technology. So when it comes to the port, it's like growing 15% a year. It's hard to go wrong if you're studying the right IT, right? So there's one. We talked about logistics and supply chain. Two, what are some of the classes in logistics and supply chain that you don't have to list them all, just some basic ones.
Right. So, we've got, port operations, we've got, as I said, materials handling, we've got port mechanization. So how, what happens within a port to make it operate more efficiently. We've got forwarding, how do you take those materials and get them where they need to go? So it's another part of logistics, but it's a very specific part. So we've got classes in all those individual areas to help, and then the students really get to choose a little bit about how they're going to orient, their own involvement and understanding.
Okay.
Because, we have to train generally, but then as students move on, they start to specialize in areas because you need to specialize.
Okay. And I know on the hospitality side, because again, that's my background, they're getting hotel management, restaurant management, meeting planning, events, and then of course within all of those, you get your finance classes, your accounting classes, your human resource classes,
Right, and those
staffing, training, everything that we need for something that's growing at 15% a year.
And those classes are also in the logistics. So those general classes, the econ and general management and those things, staffing, HR, those are all basically the background courses for the logistics also.
And I know my area specifically, and there's also specific discipline just for hospitality technology. So there's, DTU is doing a great job, and it's known for tech, so it's playing to its skill set, I think. But bouncing back to Venice. So we've talked about the different careers, the different jobs. You brought up some great stuff earlier, that it's not just business, right? So speak a little bit more about that. Maybe some of our students can benefit from it doesn't necessarily have to be a business career. It could be something else.
Right. That's the other thing that happens. You were talking about those concentric circles as we move out, from the port and the support type of activities. There's money generated, and that money starts going into other things like entertainment, different support for the arts.
Entertainment, arts,
Entertainment, arts, music.
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that is still nascent here, but is growing.
Right.
And it's happened over and over.
Yeah, this is another thing I'm going to look at. What came out of Athens, but in the 13th, during those 400 years, that list.
Right.
Yeah,
great classical music.
A lot of things being painted and written, yeah.
Concert halls.
Yeah.
And then also public spaces, right?
Yeah.
So you have St. Mark's Square.
I mean, architecture.
Right,
Yeah.
architecture. And so those same things, you can start to see here. There's some really nice public areas in Da Nang. Those things get paid for because people come here as tourists, but they get paid for because there's a port and because there's something bringing them here. So it's a port and destination. And those are some of our strengths, So like you said, we need to play into them and develop them. And it makes Da Nang a better place to live in, but it also makes it a better destination. So there's that, that virtuous circle, that happens.
Perfect.
Any final thoughts?
My final thought here is that, it's one of the reasons why I've been, so bullish about Da Nang. I think Da Nang is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to, but it has this natural setting for a port.
Right.
That is extraordinary.
No, it's a wonderful city.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place.
And
wonderful country.
And so it lends itself both to the shipping side of it and the tourist side of it. So both of those things can develop at the same time. And like I said, even in terms of, the mass transit. So, you have a terminal at the port, and, during the tourist hours, you take the tourists to the tourist areas. But on the off hours, and all night long, you're moving containers.
Right.
It's the perfect 1-2 punch.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's great.
Thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. It's not the last time he and I will talk by any means, whether on camera or off camera, but hopefully you as members of the community, people who are seeing this online and in another country, parents, students, hopefully you've benefited from sort of just from a knowledge of something that's in all our backyards, just from the perspective of two Americans who are professors at this great university of DTU. So hopefully everyone can benefit from it. Thank you for watching the first edition, the first episode of DTU Talk. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.